Hey everybody, let's talk about the Hebrew word Elohim, and specifically how this grammatically plural noun can be used in reference to individual deities. And there are three explanations I want to talk about today. Two that don't really work, and one that is probably the one we should prefer. Now, the first is the earliest, the most traditional, the idea of the plural of majesty. And the idea here is that by using the plural of this noun, you're not just referring to any run-of-the-mill example of this noun, but you are intensifying, you are multiplying the grandeur, the majesty of this noun. So this is this awesome example of this noun. Now, this doesn't work for a handful of reasons. Probably the two biggest are that this word is used to refer to foreign deities all the time. And so you're not really amplifying these deities as these particularly awesome examples of deity. Additionally, this construction is not unique to the word for God. We see it with other words in the Hebrew Bible, and we see it in other words in other languages, related Semitic languages. And most of the time, there's no way it's being used to amplify the majesty of anything. For instance, there's a language where the word for slave can be used in the plural to refer to an individual slave. And so scholars said, well, maybe this is the plural of humility. But that just uses the opposite concept to account for the exact same feature of the language. So that does not work. Now, in the 19th century, the famous Hebrew grammarian Wilhelm Gesenius came up with another way to explain the plural of majesty, and he said there were two things going on. One was that this was a variety of the abstract plural. In Hebrew, you can take a singular noun and you can use the plural to refer not to numerical plurals, but to an abstraction of the noun. So the Hebrew word av, father, when you put it in the plural, and it has an unusual plural, but that doesn't matter right now. Avot can mean fathers, or it can mean fatherhood, the abstract quality of being a father. And the other thing he said that was going on was an intensive plural. So similar to the plural of majesty, but instead of just talking about majesty, what you are amplifying or intensifying is whatever is prototypical of that noun. So it would be a plural of majesty with reference to God because that's considered prototypical of deity. Now, there are problems with this as well. To begin, majesty, power, glory are not necessarily prototypical of all deity. In the Hebrew Bible, it's prototypical of the rhetoric of praise directed at Adonai, the God of Israel, but not at all deities. And this raises another problem. Singular Elohim is used in reference to foreign deities, including in polemical speech. Why would you be emphasizing the majesty, the power, the glory of other deities while you are saying they are worthless and less than nothing? That doesn't make much sense. And a final reason this does not make much sense is because there are no indications anywhere in the biblical text that there is any semantic difference whatsoever between singular Elohim and just El or Eloah. In fact, these words get interchanged in parallel and quoted passages. And so there does not seem to be anything special about the sense of the singular use of Elohim. It just seems to mean God. Now, one of the things that Gesenius did was provide a little hint of a better explanation for what might be going on here. Toward the end of his explanation, he says, hence Elohim may have been used originally not only as a numerical but also as an abstract plural, corresponding to the Latin numen and our Godhead, and like other abstracts of the same kind, have been transferred to a concrete single God, even of the heathen. So this idea that it was an abstract plural that then became used as a reference to an individual deity, even foreign deities, makes up for the gap in this plural of majesty explanation. But he didn't really expound on that. It didn't get expounded on until the 2001 book, A Reassessment of Biblical Elohim by Joel Burnett, where Joel tracks down this construction in Hebrew and in related languages, and argues that that is the best explanation, that it is a concretized abstract plural. In other words, very early on, even before the individuation of Hebrew as a language, this plural Elohim was used in the abstract to refer to the abstract qualities of deity, to divinity, but then was used so frequently in reference to specific deities that it became concretized, a concretized abstract plural. And there are two things that this theory accounts for that I think are interesting. One, if we go to the abstraction, so we take God, and then we go to the abstraction divinity, and then we concretize it as deity, that's not marked for gender coming from an abstraction. And this is why the singular Elohim can be used to refer to goddesses. So for instance, 1 Kings 11:33, the goddess of the Sidonians is referred to as an Elohim, even though it is a female deity. Another thing that it can account for is the adjectival use of Elohim. So this is probably what's going on in what some people call the superlative use of Elohim, that it means great or most great or something like that. It probably is just an adjectival use, so of God, divine. And if we're coming from this abstraction, divinity, back to deity, then that would allow that word to be used adjectivally, referring to the divine qualities that a given noun has. And so I would argue that Burnett's theory, for the time being at least, makes much better sense than a plural of majesty. Whether the original theory or Gesenius's theory, this makes much better sense of it. And so how do we tell in the Hebrew Bible if our occurrence of Elohim is a reference to an individual deity or a plural deity? It's not incredibly difficult. There are only a few debated examples, but you just look at the verbs and the pronouns, because the plural use is going to have plural verbs. They are doing this, and the singular use is going to have singular verbs. And so the very first verse of the Hebrew Bible, Bereshit bara Elohim, bara is a finite verb in the singular. So the Elohim there is singular, God created. So the first verse does not say the gods created, it just says God created, because the verb is in the singular. And you also have pronouns that will be in the singular or the plural. Now there are some debated examples. You have plural verbs being used in reference to Elohim being put in the mouth of people who are supposed to be referring to the God of Israel. So for instance, Genesis 20 verse 13, Abraham tells Abimelech, when the gods caused me to wander. But if you look that up in your Bible, pretty much nobody translates it in the plural, because they think Abraham is referring to the God of Israel. So they're saying, we're just going to take this as a singular. And the argument there is that there is kind of a harmonization going on, where the plural noun, the person speaking or writing, is like, I want to make that plural just because the noun is plural. And while that's plausible, it doesn't really make much sense, because it is so rare. We don't see this happening a lot. In fact, the only times we ever see it happening are in places where the authors use plural verbs and readers don't want to understand it in the plural. And so this example in Genesis 20:13, Abraham is probably just using the plural. And whether you want to say this is Abraham deferring to the polytheistic sensitivities of Abimelech, you can say that, but you should probably still translate it in the plural. Another explanation is that this is an earlier form of the story where Abraham is just referring to plural gods, and there's an argument to make for that as well. In fact, the Tetragrammaton doesn't occur throughout Genesis 20 except in the very last verse, which is most likely an editorial addition, because it is giving information that the narrator thinks you already have. So in verse 17, after they have made their peace, verse 17 says, so Elohim healed Abimelech and his wife and all the women in his household. And then verse 18 says, by the way, Adonai had closed up the wombs of all the women in his household. So that's the only time the tetragrammaton occurs, and it is in what is most likely an editorial edition that is giving you information you should have already had. So this is probably an earlier narrative that is being woven into a broader narrative that uses the tetragrammaton, the divine name. So I would say that Abraham is probably, we should interpret that as Abraham referring to plural gods, and just not get too upset about that. So those are the three reasons people have come up with for explaining why this grammatically plural noun can be used in reference to individual deities. The concretized abstract plural reading I suggest makes the most sense of things. And yeah, I hope that's given you something to think about.